Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of Data Epoch. We have with us today Ishita. Our guest Ishita is part of the core team at an early stage neobanking startup called Fi, where she is harnessing the power of AI and NLU to drive impact in the B2C fintech space. She has been working in data science for the past 6 years, primarily focused on working with startups, especially those aimed at improving overall quality of life for people in India and other Southeast Asian countries. She has spoken at conferences such as ODSC and Fifth Elephant, published a book on supervised learning, and is also an industry mentor in data science and has helped multiple professionals transition into careers in this field. Hi, Ishita. Thank you for being here today.
Hi Sanjana, thank you for having me.
Okay. So, how and why did you get into data science?
So my career journey has actually been very interesting. I did not really know about data science initially. So my background is actually in physics. I did my undergrad in physics from St. Stephen's College in Delhi University. And when I was in college, I got interested in like particle physics and specifically experimental particle physics. So during the projects that I worked on, we had to deal with simulations and data at like a very large scale. So that's kind of how I was introduced into like the data side of things, like the computational physics side of things. So after that, I actually decided to do my master's in a field called high performance computing with a minor in data science. And that's actually where I had my first like touch and go with data science as well. Because as a part of the master's curriculum, there was like a bunch of courses on machine learning. And I was like, hey, this is super interesting because machine learning also has a lot of applications in physics. So I loved the sort of like the intersection of like physics and machine learning, and even like my master's thesis was all about that. And then after that, I think I sort of decided not to go further into research and I wanted to move into the industry. And I decided that data science sounds like a very interesting field to go down. So, yeah, that's sort of basically how I started working as a data scientist, moved back to India after my master's, and started working here as a data scientist.
That's a very cool transition path. So
Thank
tell
you.
us about a really cool project you worked on.
Okay, so there's been a few, but I can maybe talk about the one that I am currently working on right now because I think it's a very interesting problem statement. It's not new by any means, but it's something that I've really enjoyed working on as well. So at Fi, which is basically like a new bank for millennials, we have this one product called Ask Fi, which is a financial digital assistant. So it's a AI powered assistant for which I'm basically building the natural language understanding piece behind the scenes. So any query that a user basically asks this particular digital assistant, it's the NLU engine's job to figure out exactly what they're saying because as we all know, like computers can't really understand languages, they can't understand text. So there needs to be some way for some algorithm that can kind of extract the information from something that the user has said or written and get that information, parse it, and then based on that information, give an answer back to the user. So typically, most text-based algorithms have like a sufficient amount of text to make a prediction on. But one of the challenging things about working with a digital assistant like AskFi is that most of the queries that the users actually input are very short queries. They're at most 2 or 3 words on an average. So having such little text as an input to figure out exactly what the user is looking for from the platform, from the assistant, and then surfacing the result to the user. I think that's probably one of the most interesting and challenging problems I have been working on.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So, how do you define tech problems or AI problems that align with business objectives?
So I think tech problems, it's very difficult to start with because initially it's there's always this sort of like a battle between, oh, should I build like the perfect algorithm or the perfect solution to this, or should I maybe focus more on the business side? So I think as a data scientist, it's very important to sort of encompass both aspects of it, because on one hand, while you want to build a solution that solves a problem, I think it's also very important to understand why you're solving that problem. What is the objective behind solving that problem? So, what is the business outcome? What is the impact your solution is going to have? So, think about it from like a user's perspective, like who are you actually solving it for? Put yourself in their shoes. How will it impact them? And then consequently, how will it impact the business? And then from that angle, sort of think about how is the what is the technical aspect that you can use to sort of bring about the solution.
Awesome. So you just spoke about, thinking from the user perspective, why we're solving a problem, and about
Hmm.
your solution having an impact. So first, how do you go about collecting consumer perspectives, product perspective, etc.? And secondly, like,
Hmm.
how do you measure the impact of your work, and how do you communicate it with other stakeholders to convince them?
Hmm. So, for the first part of your question around collecting the consumer perspective, it can be a little challenging because, especially working in data science, you do end up being quite far removed from like the product, the business, and the user. So it becomes very important to maybe like try and put yourself in the place of the user. Try becoming a user of the application that you're building yourself, and think about what are the kind of features you would want. Like, imagine that your mind is the algorithm you're trying to build, and try to figure out what is your thought process into getting the answer that you're looking for. And then try to break down that thought process and then use that as basically like a baseline for building the solution that you want to build. So in order to like basically to get a perspective of the end user, you have to be able to put yourself in their shoes. You have to understand the market that you are building for. So I think that's the first part. The second part is, I think, around product
Impact.
perspective.
Yeah, measuring
Yeah,
impact
so
and convincing other stakeholders.
measuring impact is can be straightforward, but it can also not be straightforward. I've worked with problem statements in which it's been very difficult to measure impact. Some places been straightforward. So, for example, when you're working on an e-commerce website where you have to rank the results of a user search query, for example, say you are on Amazon and you search for brown study table. So now you need to be able you get a host of results, and when a user clicks on a particular result and then they go and buy that product, you know for a fact that you were able to basically create impact because the user did find what they were looking for. They did end up buying, so it had a business impact as well as a positive impact on the user because they found what they were looking for. So in cases like this, it's quite straightforward based on user feedback, based on what the user did after they saw the results of your model to measure the impact. But there may be other cases. For example, when you're using something like Google Assistant, you ask Google Assistant to set a reminder for a particular day. Now, you do that, but then you say you set the reminder and you were able to do it successfully, but you did not make any changes. So there was no feedback that the system was able to gather from your inputs. It did not know whether it was successfully able to complete the task that you told it to do, or whether maybe you just set the reminder and left because that isn't exactly what you wanted to do, but you didn't want to put in the effort to correct the system.
Mhm.
So in cases like that, it's very difficult to sort of measure the impact because you're not essentially sure about basically just based on how the user's interacting with the system. You can't say for sure whether it had a positive impact or a negative impact. So they can be problem statements across this entire spectrum. Effectively, I think sometimes when it's difficult to collect implicit feedback, it does become helpful to collect explicit user feedback, which can then sort of feed back in the model and help measure the impact of the problem statement you're trying to solve.
Awesome. So, what advice would you give someone who's new to this field of data science or data scientist or ML engineer?
I think a lot of people who are new to the field kind of underestimate the work that is usually involved when you're working in the industry, because especially coming from academia or working on sample projects, the kind of data sets that you work with, the kind of problem statements that you're trying to solve are very clean. And most of the process goes into building an algorithm that has, say, like a very high accuracy metric. Now, that is very different when you're working in the industry. It's not really necessarily like the accuracy metric that you may be optimizing for. And as a result, most of your time doesn't actually go into uh, working on the algorithm itself. So the actual modeling part, the actual algorithm building part, maybe takes up at most 10% of a data scientist job. So there is a lot more that is actually there. There's a lot of like dealing with people, stakeholders, product verticals, engineering verticals, building a system that you have to deploy so that it integrates with the other service that's consuming the output of your model. Actually just like looking at the data, cleaning the data, because in real life data is never clean. Like it's a very idealistic scenario that I think most academic scenarios provide. But even getting access to the data, looking at data, cleaning the data, it's not going to be in the perfect format. Figuring out how to sort of manipulate it and make it in a way that your model can really learn and gain information from that. So that does end up taking a significant amount of time. So yeah,
So, what is your
that's
favorite
one.
part in these real life ML life cycle stages?
My favorite part. I think honestly, I really enjoy looking at the data because, for example, if I'm looking at like a user's journey within the app, they made a payment, they came back. Suppose the payment didn't go through, or they have faced some issues, then they went to the customer support section. They tried contacting a custom agent, they talked to them, and then maybe they reached a resolution a couple of days, they come back and they want to ask my assistant on like what the status of their ticket is. So it's kind of just like sort of exploring the data to understand the user journeys, to basically get an idea of what was going through the user's mind and how you can leverage that information to help them into a better experience in the future. So just I think probably like looking at the data, using the data to really understand who I'm building the product for is probably one of my favorite parts of the experience.
Like uncover untold stories from data.
Yeah, pretty much. I think there's so much that you can learn because it's at the end of the day when you're building a product for people, it's so important to understand the people that you're building the product for. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. What are some textbooks and courses that can teach someone about a successful AI project?
Um, so in terms of like textbooks and courses, I think there's a lot of them out there. There's a whole bunch of free ones, there's a whole bunch of paid courses. Um, it's there are certain popular ones that I think like the first machine learning course I ever took was the machine learning course on Coursera by Andrew Ng, and I think that's like an excellent introduction to data science. And it's so important because while learning through experience is really important, it's also extremely essential to build a strong foundation on top of which you sort of like you work. So having a solid foundation in statistics, in mathematics, which includes like linear algebra, calculus, in like the theoretical background of say supervised, unsupervised learning, and just while understanding the theory, also kind of like giving yourself a little bit of practice through doing coding examples, maybe like through Kaggle exercises, solving problem statements, just giving yourself that practical exposure alongside the theory becomes like so important. So yeah, I think as you're maybe like looking at courses or textbooks to choose what to learn from, maybe those are some things that you can like focus on as well.
Cool. Awesome. So you've been a data scientist or a data professional in several companies. What are the best practices or best ways to structure this team of data professionals?
So it really varies based on the organization itself, the culture of the organization. Typically, for example, in smaller scale or like companies or early stage startups, it becomes very important to have someone who's more of an all-rounder. So you can have like a data engineering professional is important because they will be the one who will be like building the pipeline, setting up the entire infrastructure for the data. And then a data scientist and a data analyst also become important because a data scientist will be the one who's building the algorithms, the predictive algorithms that will be important in the future. So, and the analyst will be the ones who are responsible for like really understanding the data, getting insights out of the data, preparing dashboards and everything. So, having a team of all of these three, especially at the onset of your data science team, is going to be very crucial because even if one of these three is not involved in the, say, beginning of when you're setting up a data team, you can miss out on some really essential components of your entire system. So, for example, if a data scientist is not part of setting up like the data platform to start with, you may miss out on some crucial requirements that a data scientist may have in the future, because of which you may have to rework your entire platform, which basically involves duplicate work, and uh, redundancy is never a good thing. So it becomes very important to have all three of these. As an organization grows, as it gets bigger, as the team gets bigger, I think there is probably more scope for specialization as opposed to like generalization when the team is smaller. So you can have data science professionals who are focused on like specific problem statements, who are focused on specific areas of expertise. You can have, say, NLP experts, you can have vision experts, you can have experts in productionizing data science system like MLOps, data engineers, backend engineers who work closely with data scientists. So front-end engineers, maybe if there's any front-end platforms that need to be built out. So as the organization grows, like the number of verticals that you have within the functions themselves also ends up growing a lot. So, yeah.
Awesome. So outside work, what do you enjoy and get inspired by?
Outside of work, I think working with a startup, there you end up getting very little time outside of work. But I think one thing I always do try to take time out for is art. So I do really enjoy exploring different forms of art. And like the thing that I've picked up most recently is this thing called resin art, where basically like making like little coasters and clocks and so on, right from scratch. So I think that's been very interesting. I've also picked up roller skating again quite recently because I used to skate as a kid, and it's been a while. And I was out and I saw a pair of roller skates, and I just like bought them on a whim. And yeah, I think it's turned into a fun hobby now. So yeah, I think those are probably the primary two things that I like doing outside of work. Uh, yeah.
Very cool. Right. So thank you very much, Ishita, for sharing your experience. I'm sure everyone would really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, Sanjana.